In our apparent individuality, we are all expressions of the same infinite field of consciousness. In the profoundest sense, there is only one reality appearing as everything. This underlying unity accounts for the many phenomena that may seem mysterious from a limited, personal perspective, or completely impossible in the current materialist paradigm. But first, to understand phenomena like mind-to-mind connection and serendipitous synchronicities, we need to address the question, what is the nature of this fundamental consciousness that is the source and substance of all reality? It is not a blank void or an unconscious force. Consciousness is vibrant and alive, imbued with an inherent intelligence and creativity. You could liken it to a unified field of pure potentiality, much like the quantum vacuum of modern physics, which gives birth to all particulate matter and energy. It's not just nothingness, it's nothingness full of infinite potential. So within this field, there arises localized vortices of apparent self-awareness and individuality. They are not truly separate, but interconnected vocalizations of the same infinite consciousness. Though they appear bounded and limited when viewed through the narrow lens of the body-mind system, at their core they remain wide open and intimately interwoven threads in this seamless fabric of the one. We understand the separate self or the ego is the belief in being a distinct, limited individual, identified with the body-mind and the I and the thoughts, a confluence of memories, beliefs, feelings, and conditioning coalesced around an apparent sense of being a distinct individual. However, this separate self-sense is revealed to be transparently ungrounded upon further investigation. Have you ever looked closely and examined your own apparent sense of being a limited, encapsulated self? In a moment of stillness, can you actually find definitive boundaries where your being starts and ends? When you turn your attention towards the root of I am, do you encounter a solid, impenetrable entity? Or is there a reality of openness, boundlessness, and infinite depth at the core of your being? If we take the mainstream materialist view that our minds are completely separate from one another, confined within our physical brains, then telepathy should be impossible. My thoughts are in my head, yours are in yours, and there's no way to connect across space and time. But is telepathy or mind-to-mind connection possible in a universe of absolute unity? It's not only possible, but it is in fact the natural consequence of the fundamental interconnectedness of our apparently separate minds. Nearly all of us have had experiences where we think of someone just before they text or call. We have a great idea only to find out someone else had exactly the same idea or something very similar. These are not just mere coincidences, but glimpses of the underlying real-time resonance between all minds within the shared field. At a deeper level, the boundaries between individual minds begin to dissolve. We see that all thoughts, feelings, and intuitions arrive holographically within the same space of consciousness. The appearance of separate thinkers is something of an illusion, though an apparently very compelling one. But in truth, there is only one mind pluralizing itself into an infinite multiplicity of perspectives. So, rather than crude psychic readings, true telepathy could be understood as attuning to the resonant patterns and potentialities coursing through the cosmic mind at any given moment. The minds of all beings participate in this dynamic information flow, even if the individual mind seems largely oblivious to it. When we believe and conceptualize ourselves as separate limited individuals with an encapsulated mind, We experience the result of that belief in the external reality. We live in a disconnected world of only me. But when we look at reality increasingly more directly, with increasingly less conceptual filters, the apparent boundary between my mind and the universal mind starts to blur. We start to hear that apparent others are often thinking what we're thinking. We witness the world around us reflecting our internal openness to an interconnected information flow that transcends space and time. But if we are really ever-present consciousness, why does consciousness seem to come on and offline during states like deep sleep or anesthesia? And where does it go after death? Let's look at this as simple and directly as possible. Consciousness never actually comes online or goes offline. Those are just ideas we have about it based on our experience of an apparent person. In reality, consciousness is the constant background of all experience, the unchanging source in which all states, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and even death, appear. Look at it this way. In the waking state, consciousness appears in the form of a body-mind system with a perspective onto this world. In the dream state, that form changes and now you're appearing as a dream character in a dream world. But the same underlying consciousness is still there. It's just taking on these differing and novel forms. In deep sleep, there is no idea of being a separate individual anymore. There are no objects, no perceptions, no thoughts. It's as if both subject and object have disappeared, leaving only pure, formless awareness. But that awareness is still there. It doesn't come and go. It's just not taking the shape of a person or other object anymore. And it's not taking on the appearance of time, and so no time is experienced. You appear to fall asleep and wake up almost immediately, with only fleeting dreams in between, if you can remember them. From a third-person observer, looking at you in deep sleep, there appears to be a length of time in which you're asleep and apparently unconscious. But from your first-person perspective, you never experienced unconsciousness. Time was just compressed in comparison to the other perspective. And we see a similar phenomena in the realm of physics and space-time. In the movie Interstellar, the characters experience time at vastly different rates depending on their proximity to a massive black hole. For the astronauts on a planet close to the black hole, time moves extremely slowly relative to their companions orbiting farther away. Hours on the planet's surface equals years for those in orbit. This is a dramatic illustration of what Einstein's theory of relativity tells us, that time is not a fixed, uniform backdrop, but is malleable and relative depending on factors like speed and gravity. In a very real sense, time is a localized phenomena, a byproduct of a particular perspective within the space-time continuum. Imagine consciousness as the infinite, eternal space in which all experiences arise. Just as space-time can appear to warp and create pockets where time moves at different rates, consciousness can localize itself into pockets of experience where time seems to flow in a particular way or not at all. In the waking state, consciousness is highly localized and time appears to move in a linear fashion. In the dream state, time can be more fluid, skipping around or condensing long sequences into just a few moments. I even had a dream once where I pulled a remote control out of my pocket that could apparently control time, and I pressed reverse, and everyone in the dream started walking backwards and tripping over each other in a chaotically comical fashion. In deep sleep, time appears to disappear entirely from the subjective perspective. But just as the astronaut in orbit doesn't cease to exist when time is moving differently for the astronaut on the planet, consciousness doesn't cease to exist when it's not experiencing time in a particular way. It's simply not localized in the same way, not operating within the same parameters. The same is true in death, the death of the body. The form that consciousness was taking, the body-mind organism, dissolves. Consciousness lets go of that particular location, but consciousness itself doesn't disappear. How could it? It's the eternal background of all appearances. And it's entirely possible that after death, consciousness continues to take on the appearance of localized forms in other realms or dimensions. Many wisdom traditions and countless first-hand reports suggest that this is the case, whether it's an out-of-body experience, a journey through astral planes, a near-death experience of heavenly realms, or the remembrance of past lives. The key thing to understand here is that even in these after-death states, it's still consciousness appearing in various forms. Just because it's not appearing as a physical body in this world, it doesn't mean that it's not still a modified form of the same formless awareness. And eventually, all of these localized experiences, all these forms will dissolve back into their source, back into formless awareness, because that formless awareness itself is ever present, unmoved, and unchanged by the forms that arise and subside within it. This is what you are right now and always. The invitation is to recognize yourself as this, even while the dance of form continues. All experiences, from the most mundane to the most extraordinary, from birth to death and beyond, are invitations to wake up to the eternal aware presence that you already are. But if everything is consciousness, and the nature of consciousness is apparently peace and love, why is so much evil, suffering, and horror in this world? Why does consciousness express itself in such an apparent discord and destruction? Well, there are a few ways we can approach this. Firstly, from the absolute perspective of pure awareness, nothing is actually destroyed or harmed. Just as a wave is never harmed when it subsides into the ocean, the coming and going of temporary forms within consciousness does not damage or harm or diminish consciousness itself. It remains untouched. It's the ground of all experience. However, that doesn't negate the relative reality of suffering. And for that, we have to look at the mechanism of how conflict and destruction arise. And that mechanism is identification with the separate personal self. When we believe ourselves to be an isolated individual cut off from the whole, that experience of separateness is inherently uncomfortable, inherently lacking. From that sense of lack arises all kinds of distorted behaviors to try to fill the void. Greed, hatred, violence, domination of others. We try to complete ourselves through external things, not realizing what we long for is our true nature. All destructive human behavior can be traced back to this fundamental ignorance of our true oneness with being. When we don't recognize our innate wholeness, we inevitably fall into conflict with each other and the world, seeking to complete ourselves through dominating and exploiting perceived others. The first form of violence is conceptualizing the apparent other as separate. In our minds, we overlook our shared essence and turn them into an object, a label, an image, an idea. They are not the same, and so that justifies a difference in treatment. They are a separate object, to be oppressed or taken advantage of to satisfy our lack and hunger for more. But when the illusion of separation collapses, it's clear that the suffering you inflict on the other is actually you as consciousness inflicting violence upon yourself. With the revelation of your true nature, that is seen immediately. But it doesn't mean that you'll instantly act in the most peaceful and loving ways for once and forevermore. It takes time for this revelation to trickle into the body and mind, but over time, and with the release of old fears, emotions, and patterns, your attitudes and behaviors gradually catch up with your deeper understanding. So all the mayhem of the human ego can be seen as an inevitable outcome of consciousness appearing to forget its true, indivisible nature. All our personal and global dramas are the play of the one consciousness, lost in a kind of self-generated maze computer game, bumping into itself around every corner. And so from this perspective emerges an empowering call to action. The antidote to all the strife born of separation is the recognition of our shared essence. The healing of our personal and global pain comes through recognizing the one awareness looking out of all eyes. By awakening to our true nature and by alerting others to the dreamlike nature of separation, we can begin to unravel the illusory foundations of conflict at its core. Every mind that reflects this recognition of the one consciousness is one less mind, unconsciously generating suffering from delusion of division. The ultimate solution to the world's problems lies in the most inward of revelations and revolutions, the collapse of the rigid individual identity dissolving into the wholeness of what already is. Imagine a critical mass of minds awakening to the reality of our shared being. Imagine the blossoming of human potential when more and more are operating from wholeness rather than lack. This is what non-duality is pointing to. Not dry philosophy, not nihilism or meaninglessness, but a living revelation of an immediate power that transforms lives and reshapes the world. It sows the seeds of healing and harmony in a world fragmented and half destroyed by our addiction to illusory self-images. The world and our environment is positioned not as something separate and out there to be endlessly subjugated and plundered, but as part of ourselves to be tended to, regenerated, and healed. When we see the world as fundamentally separate from ourselves, we are much more likely to engage in unsustainable and harmful practices, seeing the environment as a resource to be endlessly plundered without consequence to ourselves. But if we understand that the world is not separate from our own being, that it is that it is in fact an intrinsic part of the totality that we are, then we are naturally inclined to treat it with the same care and respect that we would extend to our own body. In this way, the non-dual realization of our intrinsic oneness with all life becomes the foundation for a more sustainable and harmonious way of being on this planet. It moves us from an attitude of domination and extraction to one of stewardship and care. It moves us with a natural inclination to serve others in a way that elevates the whole. And so, everyone has a unique expression of this understanding, whether it's through relationships, business, passion projects, or all of it. So if you're wanting to release into your unique expression and release any old fears impeding its flow so you can do more of what you love and create a more harmonious life, then this is one of the things I help people through with my coaching program. If that resonates with you and you're serious about life transformation, visit speaktoalex.com to book a free call to see if you would be a good fit. Peace.